Hello everyone, we'll be talking about Chapter 14, the postmortem examination, also known as the autopsy. This is an interesting topic, and one of the things that I think this chapter doesn't address so much is when the autopsy occurs, because not everyone who dies gets an autopsy. So usually there's some specific reasons for that. So I'll tell you about how it works. So a typical death investigation for us is someone dies at home, so they're found either by a friend or relative or neighbor, or someone will say, hey, I haven't heard from so-and-so in a long time, can you please go check on them? So we get called, the police, and so we'll go there, and sometimes it's not obvious that someone's died, sometimes it is obvious that someone has died, and so we'll get into the home. If need be, that would be considered an exigent circumstance to determine if someone is okay, and then we would go inside and on community caretaking function and check the welfare of that person if we can articulate good reasoning why. So say we go inside, or the neighbor or friend or whoever has invited us inside said, hey, believe this person's passed away. We would examine the circumstances, and if there's anything suspicious about it, such as the person being of an age not where someone normally would pass away, a younger person, or there's trauma or anything like that, then we would get in touch with the medical examiner right away and go from there. In Whatcom County, we have a medical examiner. That's different from a coroner. The book will explain it, but the coroner is an elected official. The medical examiner is an actual doctor, and who is has the contract for the county to perform the medical examinations on deceased people. So we would call the medical examiner and give all the information: name, date of birth, address, when the person was last seen alive, if we can gather that. We would find out about medications in the home, and then what happens, we gather all this information, then make that phone call, and then the medical examiner, Dr. Goldfogle, would make the determination as to whether he will take jurisdiction of that person or release them to a funeral home. So if it's at all suspicious, or if it's a suicide, he'll take jurisdiction, and then what that means is he'll send someone out from his office, and they'll come to the scene and will pick up the body, take it back to the morgue. It's actually downtown Bellingham, and then generally it's the next day at 8 o'clock. Dr. Goldfogle will perform an autopsy. If it's a suspicious circumstance, it's oftentimes that he'll request a crime scene investigator go and partake in the autopsy, and our function there is to take photographs. So Dr. Goldfogle will go through, it's a rather long procedure, it takes over an hour, sometimes two, and he starts and works his way pretty much through the whole body. There's a real procedure for cutting open the body and doing that. First couple times I went to those, on the one hand, it's absolutely fascinating to see what the inside of a human body looks like. On the other, it's not pleasant. The smells can be really, really difficult. The scenes, the sights, I mean, it's not what you're supposed to normally see. But Dr. Goldfogle does a tremendous job of explaining how the body functions and why the person died. I found it absolutely fascinating. So I would encourage you, if you ever could, observe an autopsy. Perhaps you can see it in YouTube or something like that, but it's a real learning experience. And so that's how, with Bellingham Police, that's how someone will get to an autopsy, is there's generally other circumstances. If, for example, the person is elderly, they've been frequently in contact with a doctor because of some known health condition, the medical examiner would likely not take jurisdiction, and then the person would just go to the funeral home of the family's choice. There's a few terms here I'm going to read talking about the cause, mechanism, and manner of death. I really want to point that out. They're kind of interesting. Cause of death, the conclusion drawn by the forensic pathologist that identifies the injury or disease that led to the biological chain of events resulting in death. Mechanism of death, the determination of the forensic pathologist that identifies the biochemical or physiological abnormality that caused a death. And then lastly, manner of death, the determination made by the forensic pathologist that concludes how the cause of death occurred. And so we'll get the report maybe 6 weeks later after the blood work and everything else, all the bodily fluids have been analyzed by the lab. That'll determine if it was perhaps an overdose or some other function. Sometimes it's obvious, gunshot wound, but you still want to check for all the other things to make sure that there wasn't something else that may have led to the final event that caused the death. If, for example, you're investigating a homicide, it's really interesting, especially if perhaps there's a suspect and the suspect is saying one thing that happened, but like I've said before, the evidence speaks, and I'll give you an example here. The book gives a lot of information on different types of injuries, blunt force injuries, that type of thing. One in particular I find quite fascinating are gunshot wounds, because sometimes people will say that maybe they fired the shot. Say you're talking to a suspect and well, I was in self-defense and I fired a shot from 10 feet away. But then when you go to the autopsy, you'll see the injury where the bullet entered, but around there might be what's called stippling, where the other projectiles coming out of the firearm, the black powder, whatever it is that's causing the bullet to, is used for that. It'll come out, and it'll just come out a short distance from the pistol. So if it's close, if it's a close proximity shot, then there'll be what's called stippling around there, and you'll see these little pock marks around the hole. Quite a fascinating thing, and it, like I said, evidence speaks, and so that would mean that the gunshot was actually quite close and not far away. That's been an interesting observation over the years in going to autopsies. One of the things we check for when we arrive on scene is rigor mortis, and that's when the body stiffens up. On page 372, the 12-12-12 rule, it's pretty good. 12 hours is when the body it takes for the body to become rigid. 12 hours it stays rigid, and then 12 hours it relaxes again. So it gives you a sense of where you are, approximate time that the person died. Know that the heat or lack of the temperature makes a big difference. Same with decomposition. Temperature makes a huge difference. So keep that in mind. You'll want to know, if it's an outdoor scene, things will change. Body, especially if it's cold outside, the body will be slow to decompose. But if it's warm, if it's inside of a home and the temperature is up, body will decompose pretty quickly. So a couple things to note. This is kind of a short video, but there's a lot of good information in the book. Again, please reach out to me if you have any questions. Happy to talk to you about experiences or anything else you'd like to discuss. Like I said, autopsies are absolutely fascinating. They're difficult. I would say if you have any concerns about seeing a body in a form that you're not used to seeing, it can be a real challenge. Smells and just seeing it's quite difficult. But it's also a tremendous learning experience. You can see how the body works, and Dr. Goldfogel is a tremendous resource. He's been a real interesting person to talk to over the years going to autopsies and learning about kind of the conditions of the body and what happens over time. So I've learned a lot about that. But anyway, please, again, reach out to me if you have any questions. Thank you so much. One other thing I'd like to mention real quick is to please read the New York Times article in Canvas, and that'll explain a bit about the state of medical examiners and coroners across the country right now. So it's a real interesting article. Thanks so much. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.